What I love doing is tricking my audience. I love pulling a fast one. Magpie Murders begins with a murder mystery very much in the style of Agatha Christie. So we're in 1955 in a British village. There is a lord of the manor. There is a housekeeper who falls down the stairs and breaks her neck, or was she pushed? And there's a detective, Atticus Punt, who is a German-Greek immigrant living in Britain, who comes down and investigates. And it all continues in that sort of mode quite normally for about 200 pages. But that's not the book I've written. That's been written by a man called Alan Conway. And in the second half of the book, we move to the publishing house who are about to produce this book and put it into the shops. But they've got a problem. So the first is, the writer is dead. And the second is, it seems as if he's been murdered by one of the characters he wrote about in his book, because everybody in Magpie Murders exists in his real world. So what you're getting in Magpie Murders basically is two whodunits for the price of one, where the solution to the book itself is somehow in the real world and vice versa. When I was writing this book, I had a notebook, and the notebook ran to about 30 or 40 pages of handwritten notes and diagrams and drawings and arrows and circles and notes to myself and little things to remember and references to other books and all sorts of things, because there was so much that had to go into this book. And you open the covers of one of my books, particularly Magpie Murders, you are getting a box of tricks. And what I love about this book is that actually you sort of could solve it. That is to say that the motive for the murder, and therefore by extension the identity of the killer, can be found on page 1 of the book. And I have said this before, I've said it many times, and nobody has believed me, but people who have read the book have come back afterwards and said, yeah, it was there, but we didn't see it. And that's a sort of sleight of hand, that's a magic trick, which I enjoy. Not only is it a double whodunit, it's a book about whodunits and why we read them and why so many of them are set in English villages, why the British are so good at writing them, why we have such a tradition of female murder mystery writers. I am not the sort of writer who likes to play safe. I like to take risks, I like to do things that are different and challenging, and I like to take a twisty, surprising approach to familiar ground. And so it was inconceivable to me that I would simply write a whodunit, which is why I came up with what is actually quite a complicated template, this sort of double murder mystery investigation where one whodunit and a second whodunit are somehow interconnecting with each other. But to me it wouldn't have been good enough simply to create a detective, a sidekick, have a murder and a solution. There are plenty of those around, there are plenty that have been written. I wanted to do something new. In the actual time of the writing, when I'm sitting there with my pen and paper, I have a certainty, a confidence which is bordering on mania and arrogance. But that I think is necessary if you're going to write as much as I write. I finish the book, I sit back and I look at it and it's a work of absolute genius, and I am Charles Dickens. 3 weeks later, once it's gone to the publisher and I'm waiting for the first reaction, the book is rubbish, it's awful, it's terrible, how could I have written it? I'm going to be discovered for the fake and the fraud that I am. So it's a sort of a schizophrenia between total confidence and total apprehension and fear.
Special guest in conversation this week, he's a polymath. I say that because he does lots and lots and lots of different things. He writes, he does screenplay, he does children's books. He's a fascinating man. You're another one who went to boarding school.
Yes.
This seems to be a theme running. They did a lovely piece in the Daily Mail saying about kids who went to boarding school and how mothers used to stand there with tears in their eyes, waving off their children. Did you go at an early age?
I think I was one with the tears in the eyes.
You had the
when I waved goodbye to my mother. That's my memory of it. I went to a place when I was 8 years old up in North London, up on Harrow on the Hill. It was a horrible school. I wouldn't recommend it to anybody. I was once asked, Steve, it's an interesting question. Would I swap all the I sometimes say that, that the suffering and the unpleasantness of my boarding school fed my writing and sort of helped to make me into a successful writer. And somebody said, well, would you have then swapped not going to that school and not being a writer? And that's a very interesting question. I'm not sure. But I certainly wouldn't wish boarding school at that age on any child. 8 to 13 is when you want to be with your family, with your parents, at home, in comfort. And to this day, I don't quite understand why, when my parents knew how much I hated it, sobbing every time a term came up and going on crash diets, because I was quite a chubby child. So 4 days before school, I'm suddenly saying, I won't eat. It's pathetic, really. And all the sort of self-loathing, the beating, the violence, the sort of the cruelty, the bullying, all of it. I don't understand why they put me through it.
No.
But they did, and I survived it. But what helped me was books. Reading books, discovering books when I was 10 years old, the school library, and every year the James Bond films. They were fantastic. They really were my doorway. They were the escape line, and I would be sitting in class fantasizing about being James Bond.
Oh, you were a daydreaming boy.
Of course.
You stared out of the window. See, I went at 9.
And were you happy?
Well, I was lured there under false pretences. My parents were in the forces, and I think you got a discount if you were in the forces.
Oh, there are many children there.
You went the same. And I went there, and my parents were living in Yorkshire at the time. My father worked for a missile tracking station. It's all a bit James Bondish, actually, really.
Yes.
It's one of these secret stations. And so I was 400 miles away at 9 years old with a mattress about an inch thick, bedwetting, a tuck box, deeply unhappy. Only farmed out at the end of term back to my parents, but at the half-term exeats, you got farmed out to other parents, and they were to look after you.
Right.
And I don't think small classes. You learn to read. You learn to sort of almost be very self-sufficient. I've always discovered that kids who go to boarding school can actually hold a conversation with adults when you're about 10 or 12 years old.
That's right. You learn very, very quickly.
You learn fast.
Confidence. That's what the main thing that comes out of private schooling is absolute confidence and learning to fend for yourself and to stand your ground and everything. Other thing about boys who go to boarding school is they eat very quickly. I don't even notice that, but they all eat.
Well, you're worried
very,
it's going to disappear.
fast.
There wasn't very much of it.
That's right. You ate as quickly as possible.
I think I had a diet of haddock every morning. I used to hate haddock. I came to loathe haddock.
My hatred was porridge. We had to eat porridge. You had to finish the bowl as well, and it made me feel quite sick.
Sounds like Oliver Twist, your place.
Oh, it was worse. I think Oliver Twist had a good time compared to...
But you're right, though. You do develop a very furtive imagination. You do start fantasising. You can take yourself away from a situation. We did get the cane. I can remember on numerous occasions. I don't know why, actually. But my mother hated it. She said, on her deathbed, she said, I wish we'd never sent you to boarding school.
Well, my parents died very young, and I was never really able to have the conversation with them about why they had done it. But I think I do know, because when I was growing up, my father would have thought, my father being a sort of a Jewish immigrant to this country, or his parents had been the first generation to come to Britain, I think he probably thought that this was all sort of the stiff upper lip, cold showers, good for you, it'll turn you into an English gentleman sort of thing. And I'm sure he thought it was for the best. I mean, he wasn't a cruel man, but he just didn't have an understanding. And these days, of course, it's interesting to think that what teachers did to you and to me back then is now illegal. They would go to prison if they did it. And yet we put up with it because it was what we were told. I mean, the beatings at our school, the thing always was the person who had the blood that ran furthest down their leg won. And we, as little children, thought that was sort of all right. But it wasn't.
People used to say, show us the marks on your bottom.
Always.
You'd have to show them how many wheel marks did you have.
That's the other thing as well. That's it. And whether 2 wheel marks went over each other, which of course was even more painful. It's very interesting. I don't consider myself to be old, but when I talk to someone like you about education and about the experiences I went, I feel antediluvian, because no child listening to this now would be able to recognise what we're talking about in any modern school, and thank goodness for that. It is extraordinary how much has changed in our lifetime, but nothing more extraordinary than the way we were educated.
We had cold showers. We would come back from playing rugby and you'd have a cold shower, and then you couldn't do your buttons up because your fingers were so cold, and you'd have to get other boys whose fingers had warmed up on the radiators to try and do your buttons up. I mean, it was that archaic. The school's still there.
It sounds like the Yorkshire sketch out of Monty Python. You actually got water in your showers?
Yes, go, I tell you, luxury.
I've always thought of writing as being an adventure. The point of writing is not to make money, it's not to sell product, it is to have adventures, to travel through the world of every type of writing. Dare I mention, I even have a play opening in a couple of weeks' time.
Of course you
another type of writing, which is sort of a major challenge to actually try and write a play in the theatre. But for me, sitting behind a desk with a pen and a piece of paper, it could also easily become something that is arduous, that is just something you do for the paycheck at the end of the month. I don't want it to be that, and I love the way I can, do a children's book now, or a film, or to go, suddenly to be doing a James Bond book, or to have done Sherlock Holmes. It's all about mixing it up. I mean, I think, when I was growing up, my parents were not, my father in particular, didn't think that I would ever be a writer. He thought that was a ridiculous thing to want to be, and slightly ridiculed the idea. I mean, be a businessman, be a lawyer, be a doctor, but a writer, really? And he did rather put me down, and I swore when I became a parent, but I would never do the same as that. I sound like I'm bad-mouthing him. My father was a very good man in many, many ways, but he had sort of these very strange sort of blinkered corners of his perception. But in terms of my children, what makes me so happy, and I think this is, again, we were talking earlier about
about boarding school. When we were growing up, there was this huge gulf between us and the generation above us. You know, I would never. My son calls me Tony. Now, if I had called my father by his first name, if I had called my father by his first name, he would have had a heart attack. It would have just simply been out of the
My father too.
Nobody incidentally ever calls me Tony. I'm Anthony, but my son, for some reason, has decided I'm Tone. But you see, I love it. I love the fact that I can sit at a table with these young people and be, yes, I know I'm 30 years older than them, but at the same time, I don't feel that there's a great gulf between us. You know, in writing a book like Trigger Mortis even, I like to think that the Alex Rider readers are still with me and that we're all still part of the same family. So so that, to me, is one of the nicest things about the age in which I live, is the sense that I'm not grandpa with a cardigan and a walking stick in the corner. Not yet.
Not yet. I was going to say, not yet. You went to rugby.
I did go to rugby, where I was much happier, actually. I went to rugby when I was 13, and here's the thing, you know, Steve. The real thing about education is this. In education, we talk about schools and education and free schools and academies. What we need to talk about is teachers. A good teacher, one good teacher, can make such a huge difference in your life. And when I went to rugby, I had not one but 3 English teachers who found the writer in me and who encouraged me to enjoy drama. One of them, the other was literature, and the other one was all about grammar and language and punctuation and all the rest of it. But they just enthused me and excited me about language. And you said very kindly that I seem to be a sort of an energetic and passionate person. But the thing is that I was inspired by these 3 people when I was 13 years old, and I have never forgotten it, and it's still with me today, that language and writing and books and the world in which I inhabit is such a wonderful world to be, with so many great writers out there to enjoy. We've just phased out fagging, actually, when I was there.
Had you?
I think I was a fag to an older boy, which wasn't I know using that word these days, it's sort of...
Nobody will even understand what you're talking about.
Well, you know, cleaning another boy's shoes and all that sort of, making his toast and all that sort of stuff. But that was phased out while I was there, and the school was already modernised.
Are you a religious person?
No, I'm not. Religion was sort of knocked out of me. I was sent to Sunday school. I'm Jewish, and I was sent to Sunday school when I was 11, and by 11 and a half, I was both. I was a total an atheist. I mean, completely anti-religion in every way.
It's kind of put you off, did it?
I was pudgy and I was teased by the girls, and I couldn't understand it. I mean, Hebrew was complicated.
Yes.
And all these stories, it meant nothing to me at all. I do think religion is important. I mean, I'm not anti-religion particularly. I think that people who have religion have something very valuable. I think if you can have a life where you have a sort of a moral framework, which is what religion in its essence provides, that is largely a good thing. But do I believe in God? Do I believe in an afterlife? No.
Oh, nothing at all.
No, but I believe in life.
Yes.
I believe in using your time on the planet to do what you can for other people, to help people, to entertain people, to try and contribute and to make the world a tiny bit better than the way you found it when you came in. You know, before I came into the studio, I was having a discussion about all the wonderful television there is at the moment. I'm into The Good Wife at the moment, and that's a wonderful relaxation. And there's hundreds of episodes of it to get through. Life is too short for the amount of good TV there is.
Can you take holiday? Do you do holiday?
I tend to work on holiday, but you can tell I have a tan at the moment, and I've just come back from Greece.
I hardly noticed.
Greece a lot, and it's the lighting in the studio. It's the lighting here, but I go to Greece a lot, and I try to relax there. Yes, it's fun. I'm having fun, especially with my writing. Yes.